Welcome to the Public with Citizen Stewart. Today we are talking to Samantha Wilson Jones, JD, LLM, MBA, and she will let us know what all of these things mean in her personal story. Today we're continuing our series of conversations with individuals who can help us do two things. One, close the belief gap, the gap between what our young people are capable of and the things that they are actually capable of, and also provide an example of success rather than examples of failure. We keep studying failure in our students, but we rarely study success. I want the Unpublic to be more about that as a topic. So Samantha, thank you for joining me this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, listen, you are somebody who came to me through one of my most energetic supporters and family members here, Toya Algren, who pointed out to me that you are someone who is giving back in the Philadelphia area, working on the first board member of color for KIP, our first board chair of color for KIP, Philly. And those are all things I'm familiar with. I'm familiar with charter schools and with KIP and that world. But the more that I looked at your profile and your story, I'm not as familiar with people who go out in the world, become academically, professionally, and personally successful, and then come back and have a real passion for opening the doors for the next generation, getting more people through. So what I would love to do is just start in talking a little bit about your story first, because I always like to know what makes people tick, and demystify any secrets to the process of becoming successful. So you're doing well. You must have been born with a silver spoon in your mouth, and had a huge trust fund and went straight all the way through school, through college, and came out the other end and just did what you were expected to do because you were super rich and everything. Is that right?
Oh, if only that were true. That is absolutely not the truth. I grew up in West Oak Lane very proudly, and the daughter of a SEPTA rail operator and a school teacher, 30-year school teachers. And we were by no means privileged. I have two older siblings, and we were told very early on that when you graduate from high school, you either go to college or you go into the military. So life was geared toward accomplishing one of those two things. We have some age gaps between us. My oldest sibling is 9 years older than me. And so I think my mom evolved over the course of her child rearing time, and maybe took a slightly different approach with me. I was just speaking with my sister about it. And I think part of it may have been, some experience that she had and lessons that she learned in raising her children, but also just opportunistic. My mom was a stay-at-home mom when my sister and brother were little. She went to work when I was old enough to go to school. So from 4 or 5 years old, she was working. And so I had to do things very differently. I was forced to be independent because I was a latchkey kid. I went to school with her. She started going to school to pursue her bachelor's degree. And I went to Temple along with her. And I like to say that my first degree is in early childhood education because I sat through almost all of her classes with her. And and that was just my normal, but by no means were we privileged. I watched my sister struggle through going to college, paying for college, understanding what that process looked like. I knew the financial aid office very well via my sister, via my mom's experience, because between her classes, we a lot of times had to trek over to the financial aid office or the bursar's office. And that was just par for the course. My brother chose the military route, so I knew what that looked like as well. And my mother always made sure that because I had to be independent, that I put my best foot forward in what I was doing. School was my responsibility. It was my job. So I had to do it well. And if she could get A's in her classes, I had to get A's in mine.
Did you always do well in school?
I did. It was, I wouldn't say it was natural. I remember struggling with reading comprehension when I was in elementary school. I remember reading slowly when things were put up on the overhead projectors back in the day, aging myself. I was probably one of the last kids to finish reading or ask for more time to read. I used to be embarrassed about that a little bit. I could learn the information. It took me a little bit longer to read it and process it. And I worked on that and got better at that. And my mother, being a teacher, was very instrumental in helping me accomplish that. So natural, no, but I worked hard and I was taught to work hard.
Do you think that it would be possible that you would have taken a detour or not have done so well if you didn't have a parent that was an educator at home?
Absolutely. I think that my mom's course definitely shaped our lives because we were always taught. She always taught us that school is what you make of it. It doesn't matter what school you go to, how much pedigree that institution has or not. School is what you make of it. It's your job. They're going to give you certain information, but you've got to put in hard work. So that means sometimes you have to supplement that information. You have to go to the library. We had encyclopedias back in the day before Google.
Oh, wow. Really?
So,
a full set?
Yeah. It took a while. It took a while for us to get to Z, but we made it. But I had to read the encyclopedia. So having a mom who was very much about education definitely helped. I did not have a summer off. Every summer, I was put into something, 4-H, the Brownies. I worked at the Franklin Institute. I hated it. I wanted to sleep in. I wanted to do what my friends were doing over the summer. But every summer, she miraculously found some program that I had to be in part, I think, because, education was important. But also, as I said, she was no longer a stay-at-home mom. So I had to have something to do.
It's interesting, this thing about latchkey. First of all, I can't imagine latchkeys existing today, latchkey kids. I was a latchkey kid for a portion of my upbringing. It does foster independence. It does also seem wildly dangerous now that I think about it looking back. Like I was a latchkey in kindergarten. I remember coming home by myself, picking up the key out of the mat and getting in the house by myself in kindergarten. So looking back at the type of schools that you went to, was there a difference in the way that you were being set up to succeed versus some of your peers in the same schools? Or were you in a school where it was mostly the culture of the school was mostly like what your mom was embedding into you?
I think my mother was very deliberate about the schools that I went to. I only went to one neighborhood school. My elementary school was my neighborhood school. My middle school and my high school, I traveled to. And I remember spending time picking out schools because I was not just going to go to the neighborhood school because it was around the corner. We're going to pick the school that best suits your needs, that best interests you, that has the right programming, the right extracurriculars. Where these private schools, no, I went public the entire way. But for example, when I went to high school, I liked languages. I liked the idea of traveling. I liked history. And when we looked at the magnet schools, Bodine stuck out for me. It was very different. I did not want to do what everybody else was doing. And I think that may be a factor of being the youngest in the family. You like to blaze trails. You don't want to do it just because your siblings did it or your mom did it or your mom taught there, in my case. So I always tried to find something that was uniquely mine. And I wouldn't be somebody's little sister when I got there.
I think that's so important for a couple of reasons. One, my colleague, Dr. Charles Cole, in his book that he wrote about successful Black males that have made it through the crack epidemic and made it through, community distress in their neighborhoods to do well in life. One of the things that was one of the key criterias was that they all saw their parent actively making a choice for where they went to school. They got to see it visually. It wasn't private to them.
Yeah.
So even hearing that your mom that you remember that you were actively picking a school, that you weren't just going to the neighborhood school. Again, that kind of relates back to my question though, too, is that for the the young people in your neighborhood who are your peers, your same age group, who weren't making those type of decisions, it seems like their life could have went very differently because they didn't. Maybe they just went to the neighborhood school, that put them on a different path, no fault of their own.
Right. Yeah, that's very true. And, as a kid, the things that I thought about were not so much that I'm going to be on a different path than the kids in my neighborhood or my friends. It was more about, well, they're all going to the same school and I'm the oddball out. I got to go, I got to trek on 3 buses or 2 buses and a trolley and, to get to my school, and everybody else is home by, 3:30 and they get to see Inspector Gadget and I don't because I'm still a half hour away. So that was my thinking, as a kid that, hey, I didn't have a connection with the other kids in my neighborhood because I didn't go to school with them. I saw them on the block. Yeah, but I didn't go to school with them. I didn't go to church with them. I just saw them on the block. They were just people who lived there. My friends were all over the place.
It also must make it tough when you're in that situation to maintain relationships with the people that you do go to school with, because, if they're close to the school, they're all able to hang out and you're, having to trudge across town and go home.
Yeah. And add to that, I grew up in a very, very strict house, very, very strict, very, very religious. So even if we were in the same neighborhood, we were not doing the same things. So yeah, it did make it challenging to establish those connections and those relationships. And, looking back, and I tell my daughter this all the time, to embrace the space in which you are, have a full educational experience, which includes that networking, which includes that socialization, because I feel like that is probably what I did miss out on. For all the benefits of school selection, school choice that I had via my mom, I did miss some of those opportunities to socialize and grow in that way as a child, and even up through college. To this day, I don't have any friends from any school predating my MBA program.
Wow.
In relationships with.
Wow, that's intense. Actually, I can see it, something somewhere in my own life, but there sometimes can be a tax to the things that we do to make successful children and to make successful students. You're forsaking one part of your social life. You're making trade-offs. Black folks make trade-offs a lot in education. They move to a neighborhood. Maybe they move to the suburbs thinking that the schools are better, and they are, but they lose out on a part of the cultural aspect of learning. Or maybe they send them to a school where all the culture is great. In terms of, I shouldn't say all the culture is great. I mean, they are getting their Black cultural connection, but they're not getting the academics. These are the trade-offs. I'm listening. As I'm listening to you talk, I'm hearing keys to your successful development. And one very definitely is active parents who are actively engaged in setting rules and boundaries and coaching. I'm also hearing some of the proverbs. I call them the Negro proverbs. And in my life, my mom, my grandparents, and others all had these things that they would say around: be the best you can be, no matter what it is you're going to be. If you're going to be a street sweeper, be the best one. All the stuff around, like, once you get an education, they can't take it from you, that stuff. So that's one key I'm hearing right now, is the parental kind of power within your situation. There's this Gandhi quote. I bring it up all the time. There's no school equal to a decent home and no teacher equal to a virtuous parent. So you had a decent home and a virtuous parent in your life. But you also mentioned faith. So tell me if faith at all is something that you attribute to some of your success.
Absolutely. In the sense that it gave me confidence to do whatever it was that I set out to do. So my mother used to tell us all the time. So when I wasn't at Temple in school with her, we were at church. We went to church, or at least I did, probably about 6 days a week. And I separate out, myself, because that was not my brother and sister's life. But again, I had to stay active. So I was in church almost every day. And what my mother would always tell us about church and faith is that there's God and then there's everybody else. And so it put everybody on equal footing, black, white, old, young, rich, poor. It didn't matter. If you were not God, you were right here with me. We were right on the same level. And she pressed that into us. And I remember it keenly because I was never allowed to think of myself as less than. We didn't have a lot. We were not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. We were teased and picked on. I remember those things because we didn't have, we had the Bobo sneakers and, things like that. We didn't have the cool clothes, the cool toys, the cool gadgets, and any of that. And when we did get it, we were, many years behind the trend. But, she would always say, they're no better than you. They just might have different things. And so that definitely resonated with me as I went through school and into my professional career, that regardless of where I came from or what someone else appeared to bring to the table, we were all on equal footing. And unless you were God and you could work some miracles, you could part or turn water to wine, you were no better.
Which meant nobody.
Exactly.
Which nobody's better than you. In our conversation that we had before this one, I asked you about this, and the reason that I was asking you in terms of, did you ever in your path experience stereotype threat? The idea that you're about to take a test, and there's research around if you make somebody list their race at the top of a paper before they take a test, for Black people that have to actually list their race, they do poorer on the test than if you don't ask them that question, which opens up all kinds of other research, like about what's going through your mind. So in terms of you, like, experiencing stereotype threat, and what was the other one that I asked about? Stereotype threat and imposter syndrome, because as you move on in life, you're going to be in rooms with people who are not from your same cultural background. They're not from your same heritage. They're working in global corporations with a pedigree, and they have all this stuff going for them. And here you show up. Did you ever experience? Well, let me ask the question differently. The thing that your parents gave you as a solid foundation, and that faith gave you as a solid foundation, did that spare you from having stereotype threat and imposter syndrome?
In one sense, yes. So was I ever afraid to be in the room? Did I ever feel like I didn't belong in the room? No. But I worked to make sure that what I presented in that room was the best that I could bring to the table. Back to your point about, if you're going to be the street sweeper, be the best one. And to follow on with that, when you think about imposter syndrome, I didn't feel, like I said, I couldn't be in the room, but I felt beforehand I'd get nervous. I knew I was confident. I was not always the most confident person in the room, but I never lacked confidence. So I would work hard to prepare, to know what I was walking into to the extent that I could. I think the experiences that I had of school selection, not going to neighborhood schools. In high school, my senior year of high school, I was an exchange student. I lived in Denmark for a year. I was probably the only student there. In large part. Eventually I met some folks from Africa, from South Africa. That was great. But I had been in those types of environments consistently where I was the only one, and had to fend for myself. And so walking into a boardroom to give a presentation, or speaking up for myself with a manager who was disrespectful, was I nervous? Yes. Did I lack the confidence to do it? No, because again, you're not God. Did I shake when I walked out of the room? Absolutely. Like, I don't believe I just did that. But
which would have just been normal for you, right? Like, I mean, you wouldn't have been human if you wouldn't have had some shaky feelings about it. But you had enough to be in the room and to survive it in a way in which it wasn't going to damage you, right? Like, but a young Black girl from Philly in Denmark in high school, what is that experience like? What is happening there Talk about fish out of water. Tell me about that
Yes,
experience.
yes. So I have to tell you the whole story. I'll do it as quickly as possible. So I told you I went to Bodine International High School, and I had the opportunity. I think it was from fifth grade to be skipped to seventh grade, and my mother flat out refused. She said, "You need socialization. You need to stay with kids your own age." So I did. So fast forward when I got to high school, tested into Bodine, which is a magnet school, and I placed into 10th grade classes. So I
Mm-hmm.
took English with my grade, and all of my other classes were with the class ahead of me. So into my junior year, I'm facing all of my friends leaving, and I only need one class to graduate. And because school was my job, my mom told me that, if you have an issue at school, you deal with it. And when you get to the point that you can't deal with it, then you call me, but don't call me first. So I took my case to the principal, Mr. McCarthy, and I said, okay, so here's my situation. So can we talk about what the options are? I asked if I could go to college for the majority of the day, come back and do my English class. He said, nope, that's not a possibility. I said, okay, well, how about I come do English in the morning, then I go do a work program? He said, nope, that's not a possibility. And I was sitting on the bench outside of Bodine has a World Affairs Council liaison. I was sitting outside of her office and she walked out and we were just chatting and I was telling her my plight of the day. And she says, well, did you think about an exchange? And I said, well, tell me more. So, so I applied for this exchange program through Rotary International, unbeknownst to my parents, did not tell them until I was accepted into the program with a full scholarship. And you could pick the 4 countries in order of preference that you wanted to go to, and the 4 countries under no circumstances that you would ever go to. My 4 countries that I would never go to were countries that no longer exist. So for obvious reasons, I didn't want to go, Yugoslavia, for example. And this was in the 90s. So yeah, Cold
Mm-hmm.
War was maybe,
Mm-hmm.
countries were breaking up and, you might not make it back home. Um, And then the 4 countries I wanted to go to in order were South Africa, Zimbabwe, Argentina, and Brazil. This was again early 90s. Rotary was pressing to get South Africa for me because it would have been the first time that South Africa was on the list post-apartheid. And long story short, I lost my 3 countries fighting for South Africa. And
Mm.
ultimately, South Africa said they could not assure the security of an American with Mandela just having been released, becoming president. There was all kinds of unrest, civil unrest in the country, and they did not want an American in the country who could potentially be harmed. So now I have no countries. And the president of Rotary called me 2 days before Christmas and said, we have your country. I'm on one phone upstairs. My mom's downstairs on the other line. And he said, Denmark. And I was silent. And my mother said, we'll call you back. He said, you have 24 hours to accept because this is the only country left and we need everybody placed by Christmas. And I said to my mother, my geography teacher and his wife, who was our Algebra 1 teacher, were world travelers. They would take sabbatical every few years, travel the world. So I said, if they've been there, I will go. Because, to me, this was some godforsaken place. And the next day I went to school and I asked Mr. Patterson, and he immediately says, oh, and you have to go to Tivoli, you have to go to Copenhagen, and then you have to do, and he ran down a list of like 15 things you had to do in Denmark. And I could have melted into the floor of like, oh my God, I got to go to this place
Yeah.
now. It turned out to be the best experience of my life.
Really?
Notwithstanding the fact that other than the few South Africans I met there, I was the only thing of color. And I lost a lot of my melanin while I was there, to the extent that my mother didn't recognize me in some of my pictures. But it was a phenomenal experience. At that point, there was one flight in and out a day to the US. So my parents were 24 hours away from me, at least. And not to mention several thousands of dollars that they did not have. And you had to figure things out.
Mm-hmm.
If something
Mm-hmm.
wasn't going well, you had to figure it out. If
Mm-hmm.
I got an allowance from Rotary while I was there, if I spent all my money, I had to figure it out. And when I came home and went to college, so that was my senior year. I came home 2 months later. I was in college. I had I had experienced that independence and that freedom that my friends in college were just experiencing. And so, when they were like, let's stay up all night, even though we have an 8 o'clock class, I'm like, yeah,
Hmm.
no, I'll see you in the
Yeah.
morning because I had already done it. It wasn't like,
Yeah.
what are we gaining from this? And it positioned me in very differently going into college. I was much more serious. I was much more focused. Um, and I was able to bring my best self to the situation. I also had to learn to be responsible in Denmark. I couldn't just party my days away. I had responsibilities over there. I still had to pass English, but they
Hmm.
flipped it to
Hmm.
Danish. I had to pass Danish to get my college high
What?
school
Wow.
diploma. Well, they didn't think it was
Wow.
fair if I had to pass English. So
So all of this put together, does this make your first year of college? Do you bypass all the stereotypical stumbling blocks of the people who go to college in the first year? They bomb out on a lot of things, or they just don't know how to schedule and can't handle the schedule, or they need remediation. Were you like, was your first year different because of all of this setup that we see in your story?
my first year was different in that I was focused. I knew what I wanted to do. All of my friends changed their majors at least twice. I did not.
Mm,
But there was a downside to it. I hadn't really spoken English as a primary language for a year. So I had to remember the English language, the vernacular, how to write a paper in English. So those were the types of things that I struggled with. But in terms of navigating the financial aid office, the bursar, my advisor and I fought every time I went to see her, bless her heart, because she figured she knew what was best for me. You can't possibly take 20 credits every semester. Yes, I can.
mm.
And I can do well. So I had different struggles when I went to college, not the typical ones.
Yeah, you had smart kid problems. those aren't those aren't like average problems. So, the typical thing for me to say at this is, well, it sounds to me like you had very high expectations, which we also know is a key ingredient. It's a key. Like I've heard a superintendent say to me and many educators that oftentimes young people will rise to the expectations that you set for them.
Mhm.
And it sounds like exactly in your case, all of these things. When I asked you a question like going to Denmark, what was that like as a high school senior? And listening to your response and your story about it, it's like setting up another high bar that you had to live through and do it on your own, and you're away from your family, right? So you just have to figure out things because you have to figure things out.
Yeah.
All right, so that gets us to college, and let's expedite a little bit here because what I've heard so far, honestly, to me, are many foundational things that create a successful human, a successful person. One thing I didn't ask about, how was the community input, the adults other than your parents and
Mhm.
families other than your parents? What role did they play in you staying on the right path?
Community was everything, but it was slightly different. It wasn't necessarily West Oak Lane. It was the Christian Church of Philadelphia.
Hmm.
That was my community. That's where all my aunties and uncles and godparents, none of them officially having any of those titles, but that's where they all sat. All of our extended family was down south, so that became our extended family. And I was always touted as you're the smart one, you're the one who's going to make it, you're going to do this. So there was a level of expectation that came from them, but also a level of support. When I had graduation, they were there. When there was a ceremony for whatever we were celebrating, they were there. And so it just gave you the encouragement to keep going.
Yeah, for people watching and listening, the Search Institute is an organization that I point to a lot. They have a lot of research around how you create healthy people and what young people need. They narrow it down to 20 internal assets and 20 external assets, and together they're called the 40 developmental assets. And one of the ones that I found that was surprising was that young people do need interaction with adults outside of their parents that also have an active kind of hand in either supporting, shaping, showing you what's possible outside of your parents, and that type of community. That's getting increasingly hard when we think about the type of deterioration of neighborhood cohesion that used to exist. In 7th Ward, New Orleans, I can, always ring back to that in my own life. Didn't matter how poor or rich you were never going to be without a cup of sugar if you needed one, type of thing, right? Like if you were out of Crisco, Chris was going to go to somebody else's house and pick that up. Right? My grandmother would pull me out of the room and send me to pick up stuff like shopping from Miss So-and-so's house all over the maps, right? A lot of that's missing now. A lot of times you're raising a child by yourself. You don't have people around you. So I love that. Okay, so you do well in college, and then you do so well that you keep going through college, and you become an attorney. You and I talked about the LSAT, for instance. When I was young, I really thought that being an attorney was everything. Like I really wanted to be an attorney. I can remember at some point in my adult life looking at the LSAT and going, "That's for crazy people." I do not understand. I do not understand that at all. How much of this, you excelling in things like the LSAT and then going to law school and, coming out of law school and still continuing, how much of this is actually you just being naturally gifted, not nurture, but nature? It does seem like the LSAT is something that either you have a mind for it or you don't. It's not something that's taught. How much of this is nature versus nurture?
I think there's a lot of nurture. Going back to what I said about my reading comprehension issues and things like that, I was never good on standardized tests because on one hand, I think I was too smart for standardized tests, some of them, because they want a certain type of answer. And I always wanted to think. I always wanted to figure it out. And so when it came to standardized tests, it took me a long time. It took me to the bar exam to realize that, no, they want you to say this, write this when you see that. And that's how you pass the test. So I struggled with the LSAT. I ended up taking a gap year between college and law school because my LSAT score was not great, and I needed to take it again, and I needed that time to take it again that I didn't have in my senior year of college. So yes, is there some natural gift? I think the natural gift, to the extent there is one, is determination.
It's not something that it doesn't make you like a prodigy where no one else could repeat what you were doing. Someone else could do what you're doing if they put in the hard work and the time and the effort. Okay. So this isn't just about Samantha being gifted and, these things came easy. You're obviously saying there were some struggles.
Absolutely. My brother is a firefighter, and I tell people all the time, I would never. There's not enough money in the world that you could pay me to run into a burning anything to save anyone. But conversely, people look at what I do and they're like, "Oh, you're a lawyer." Yes, but if you read the books, if you do the work, if you take the exam, you too can be a lawyer. That doesn't require a certain level of grit and tenacity that is unattainable by the average person. It is a skill to deal with, medical conditions all day and to have the temperament to do that. It is a skill to be a teacher. Even though, yes, they are very degreed and credentialed, it takes a certain person and personality to do that. I don't see that being the same for what I do. And maybe others will argue that case, but I don't view what I do as being that unique and special and I'm the only one who can do it. Read the books, take the test, you're a lawyer.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because you do have to be unique and special in some ways. I mean, just to be you, to be Samantha, because you're doing the work that you do at a level of which it's rare for people of color. It's even rare for Black people, and it's even rare for Black women in global corporations and doing global corporate work as an attorney. Those industries are always crying about how much diversity they need. They don't have it. We just can't find anybody. We just can't find anybody. There just aren't any people of color qualified to do what we do. So in some ways it is special, right?
Yeah, in that regard, which you can't find what you're not looking for.
Are you saying that part of the issue might be that they're not looking hard enough?
It's not looking hard enough and not nurturing the younger generations to go into those professions to be available. There's a pipeline issue. I think there's something like 5% of all lawyers in the country are Black. Five.
Wow.
Five.
Wow.
So if that is
Yeah.
the number that you're starting with, most corporations do not hire you right out of law school. So let's say that 5% they all go into law firms. Black people have the highest, Black people and women, and then you put the intersectionality of that together, self-select out of the profession more than any other demographic. So that 5% maybe becomes 3% by the time a corporation is considering bringing somebody in, which is usually no less than 3 years having worked at a firm. Well, if you only have 3% to pull from, there's not a lot of opportunity. How many corporations are there in the country?
So this, for me, that becomes really important to talk about the work that you're doing. I was going to ask you what was one of your motivations for wanting to give back, wanting to start your own organization that helps young people, that mentors. You obviously believe in the power of mentorship, but that's a very real world practical problem. Are young people not even seeing the pathway to, for instance, law school? So tell me a little bit about that work. When you decide to go back and give back, you want to open doors, you're sitting on a board of a school. What's your main driver, your motivation, and what are you seeing as like the thing that more of us should do to open doors for young people?
Sure. So my motivation is ultimately you can achieve what you can see. I became a lawyer, and people laugh at me often when I say this, but I became a lawyer because of Claire Huxtable on The Cosby Show. And there were, I believe, 5 episodes where she actually practiced law. And I know those episodes, and I remember those episodes. I remember her fighting for Sandra's restitution when the mechanic did her wrong. But that's why I became a lawyer. I didn't see a lawyer. I didn't know a lawyer. I saw Claire Huxtable. We don't have The Cosby Show or shows like that nowadays. And I realized early on that if children don't see what the possibilities are, how could we possibly expect them to seek to attain it? Yes, I had a very active mother at home who encouraged that when I expressed it, but it still started with me seeing something. And so even in college, though the organization did not manifest itself until many years later, I had the thought of being able to give back and helping people understand, helping students understand the power of achievement when you have an example. And I formed my organization in 2010. It's called Jane. It is not exclusive to women, despite the name. It is my mother's middle name. And I named it in honor of her after she passed in 2010. It stands for Jewels, Advancing, Nurturing, and Empowering. And our children are the jewels who are advanced through education, nurtured through mentoring, and empowered to succeed. That's where that came from. And that naturally bled over into KIP, in the sense that I was working in corporate America, and corporate America kept talking about, we don't have pipelines. We don't have, or not that they didn't have pipelines, but there aren't enough X for us to go hire. We can't hire Black lawyers because there aren't enough, or they don't exist. And I raised the same point that I raised here today. It's a pipeline issue. And so I happen to know someone in leadership at one of the KIP schools, and we worked together and created a mentoring program. And that program was designed to expose students, 6th graders, to career fields that they might not otherwise know about. The staff at the school work to identify the students to participate and also what their interests would be. And then I worked to find mentors within my organization that were doing the jobs that those kids were interested in or as closely aligned to that as possible. So, and they came to work. Those kids came 2 hours every other week and they went to work. So they could see what that job entailed. If you said you wanted to be an engineer, you went to the engineering design meetings. You participated in WebExes because we were a global company. Even before COVID hit, we were on Zoom and WebEx. So you got to talk with or be in the room when conversations were happening with folks in Europe or Australia or Canada or wherever they might sit. You got to talk to your mentor about what degrees did it take for you to get there? What classes did you have to be good at to get there? You can't be an engineer without math and science. So if you're not focusing on that, you need to change your focus. And catching them in sixth grade allows you the time to understand that I need to shift and do something slightly differently. So that's always been my motivation for giving back is you have to see it to know that it is a possibility. Even if in some cases you're not seeing it from a Black person.
Well, but where you started to me is amazing because I do think the power of like popular culture. Like, I remember watching The Cosby Show all through the 90s, and it just made me feel bad about my life, to be very honest with you. I'm glad it made you feel like you wanted to be an attorney. It made me feel like I took some wrong turns in life because you got like a doctor and a lawyer, and then one of the sons is like high ranking in the military and whatnot. And then the spinoff is where I found like some cultural home, like when it spun off to A Different World. That was more my age group. It was interesting watching people be natural in college, just be like normal human beings in college, not like it was like something special. So our kids need role models, but I think you went deeper than that too. Not just do they need role models, they need to see things demystified about what's possible up close. Yeah. Right. Because you can have a TV idea of what an attorney is, and then you can go and do an internship over the summer at a law firm. And that internship is gold. Now, I do know years ago, I used to work on this issue for the state of Minnesota, and legal was one of my industries that I was studying the pipeline, trying to figure out why we couldn't get more Black people in the pipeline. And those things like the internships are very white. And very connected, like, the uncle of a partner and the uncle of somebody who's already working there. And it was an issue to get people to see that, that talk wasn't enough. Like the talking about it wasn't enough if you're not going to open doors to have young people come in. So I love what you're saying about with Jane, with bringing young people up close so that they can see, can be demystified. Anything out of that, like this all sounds good, Samantha. This all sounds good. This all sounds good. But I do remember some situations with me bringing young people into certain environments that required a lot of finessing. And a lot of, helping people to see, see beyond things or whatnot. Is there a side to that of this? I mean, we're going to talk about this in all, in positive terms, but I mean, it's not easy work. It's not always easy work.
And you're absolutely right. There is a level of etiquette and professionalism that is not necessarily innate. There were things that, I had to learn along the way. You go to your first 5-star restaurant for a business meeting, and you're like watching like Julia Roberts and Pretty Woman to see who picks up which piece of utensil, trying to figure that out. So that's the mentoring that Jane does. We do professional mentoring. So even though we're working with youngsters, middle school, high school, we do professional mentoring, and it's geared at helping to equip the students with the tools that they're going to need to succeed in their professional lives beyond the education. You're going to need to know some terminology. You're going to need to know how to conduct yourself in certain settings. You're going to need to know how to make a presentation, or the fact that you have to make a presentation. One of the programs that my mother put me in elementary school, and I hated it at the time, was an oratory program. Every week I had to give a speech. So public speaking was not an issue for me. Had I not done that, you know, would that have been something that hindered my ability to advance in corporate America, or to be able to have those conversations where I didn't feel like an imposter?
Mm-hmm.
So Jane is very much focused on supplementing those types of necessary tools that students will need, because you're absolutely right. When you go to the organization, you know, when I went to my global corporation and said, this is what we want to do, you know, I got some side eye. You know, you
Mm-hmm.
want to bring in
Mm-hmm.
at what grade, and they're coming from what part of Philly?
Because you were talking about sixth grade, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Whoop.
six
Middle
Philly
school.
North graders, North
Yeah.
Philly students, and they came in a variety of ways. And, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and we had to help nurture them through the process, but we also supplemented that by, and I worked with some very good colleagues in HR who helped me develop a training program for the mentors as well, in terms of the emotional intelligence that it takes to deal with someone who's diverse, deal with someone who has a different background than you, deal with a child. Everybody's not child friendly, and how you
Mm-hmm.
need to interact with the child on their level in a corporate setting, to their benefit. So there's a lot that goes around that. It's not just, you know, you give them the internship and that's it, everything's great. No.
No, and you'll see internship programs actually shut down or stop because it'll be someone who has a decision-making position who will say, yeah, we tried that once.
Mhm.
Yeah, that didn't work out real well. And behind them saying that didn't work out real well, there's some subtext to that.
Yeah.
But maybe it's they didn't have a person on staff who owned the program well enough, or they didn't have the stamina for working through issues when there were
Mhm.
issues. So thus we tried that once and no more. What can be so in one way, those young people who are coming through your mentorship and seeing the world are benefiting from that. What are ways that you think that we as parents, adults, the community, and others can be working on that part where by the time they get to you, they don't have to learn what fork to use, or, you know, because it seems to me that like some of the best interns by the standards of those programs come in and they already have a lot of the cultural, you
Mhm.
know, affect that's necessary to do well in it. And I just feel like if we were being very supportive of young people outside before they get to an internship situation like that, that maybe we could be doing our part, our role to help. Does that make sense? Even when I
Yeah.
say that, like to you, that we could do more?
Absolutely. I think that, one, getting back to this concept that it takes a village. You know, when we were growing up, and I'm going to, you know, project here and make some assumptions, but when we were growing up, you were raised by everybody. Everybody was
Hmm.
mom,
Hmm.
everybody was dad, everybody had the right to correct, for your benefit. And I think we've lost that a little bit in society. And couple that with exposure. You know, while my family didn't have the resources to, you know, allow me to do certain things, some of those aunties and godparents from church had a little bit more money. And so they could take me different places. I could have different experiences with them. But my mom had to not be prideful in
Mm.
letting me go to the museum with Miss So and so or Mr. So and so, because they could afford that, or letting me have some of those experiences, even if it wasn't with my parent. The other thing that I think we as community raising children can do is explore the options. You know, my mother got real creative. 4-H, I made tea from dirt. You know, I was like, where did you find this program?
Yeah.
Scientific part bone in my body ever. But you know, every year she somehow magically found these things, and they were free. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
and to the extent that things aren't free, there are a lot of organizations that offer grants and scholarships for participation. Schools have this information. I know at KIP they you know have this type of information of resources and activities that students can do. And you know, we need to all come together as a community and find those outlets and those opportunities for students. There's nothing worse than a student not doing well in school, or doing um, worse than they should otherwise be doing, because they are naturally gifted, just because they don't have an outlet to explore that gift and that talent.
I'm glad that you mentioned 4-H. So a lot of those groups, 4-H, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, groups. I'm not even going to say Jack and Jill because I'm going to act like I know what that was, and I was very old before I figured out that there was this secret society of Black people keeping their kids away from the rest of us. But there were these groups, these cultural groups. Besides church was one, but besides church, that I see have shaped young people for generations. I'll tell you like a quick story. The first time I went to Indianapolis, I was staying in downtown Indianapolis, and there were I was going to some sort of training program throughout the day. I'd walk from my hotel to the training, and on the way there were swarms of young people just everywhere in the streets. And in my hotel, there were swarms of them. And it hit me at some point that every single one of them that I bumped into were the most polite, most kind of, kind of stand up-ish and poised and hold the door for you type. And I was like, what is going on here? They were all wearing the same jacket. And there were these blue jackets. It turns out it's this group, and I'm going to butcher the name. I'm not sure. I think it might be Future Farmers of America or FF something or whatever. But it is this statewide program, may even be national, that I had never heard of, that has young people from rural areas, that it's like 4-H, like what you just mentioned. And it's a culture development thing, because they develop a culture of hard work and of being, workers and, knowing how to interact. And it hits me when I see things like that there are many of our children that are not growing up in any culture producing social situations. Right. We're unchurched more than we've ever been, ever. So churches is losing, especially with the millennial generation, churches are losing people. Oftentimes when we do church, we mega church, and mega churches don't always have the same experience because they're so big. Right. Like, so I love that you are doing this mentorship work. Do you think, like, what help would you need to make Jane become a bigger thing, so it's not as much of a yeoman's work that you have to do alone? What type of help would you get, and how could you see the rest of us rallying around when we see programs like Jane?
Sure. Well, money always helps.
It sure does, don't it?
So I'd be remiss if I didn't say that. Working in nonprofit has taught me nothing if not to always make an ask. But beyond that, I think just the bodies, just the community, like I said, when we do professional mentoring, I have professionals in a specific subject matter come in and speak to the students. I am not an expert in public speaking. So I have someone in communications who that is their profession. They come in and speak to the students. We talk about finances. I have financial experts come in. So if you have that ability, if that's your skill set, that's always welcome, so that we can expose these students to people who are doing the jobs. Cultural experiences. We take the students to a 5-star restaurant. That's our kind of graduation ceremony, and we do an etiquette class with them as part of that experience. And we do it in a fun way, so it doesn't feel like you're a fish out of water. Everybody's learning at the same time. So again, to the extent that you're able and willing to help with those things, and also just connections to the kids. Yes, I'm affiliated with KIPP. I'm affiliated with a couple other schools in the area. But if you have kids that want to participate in the program, that's also or a connection to an organization where we could bring this resource to the students, that would be great as well.
All right. Well, for people listening, money does matter. Yeah. I know this. I prided myself for a long period of time in my life when I was doing free things, when I was giving of myself in ways which I was building mentorship programs, building pathway opportunities. I did some stuff through my church. I had a job ministry through my church. I had a clothing ministry through my church. And I prided myself on that. But you shouldn't have to pride yourself on that, because all around me were people with resources or whatnot. I remember we did a drive once on Christmas time. So we had lots of people in job programs that didn't have men that didn't have appropriate things to wear for job interviews.
Mhm.
And so we worked with law firms. This is right up your alley, to get attorneys to donate a suit. And we put it out to all my friends that were administrators in law firms. And on the day that it came to pick up the suits, we had to get extra vehicles. That's how many got donated. So we suddenly had a wardrobe closet, and we thought, why hadn't we done this before? Why are we out here trying to always just do stuff on our own without asking, for help? So I'm glad you said that. Well, listen, as we wrap, here are some things that I heard today, and you can correct me, or you can check the list, or you can add. So I heard these things is important to your success story, and that could be important to others. Parental guidance and boundary setting. A parent who actually is intent upon your success, and you can see that intention and feel it as a young person. Faith. Church participation and the community that comes with church participation, so that you have an extended family of people that are invested in your success and on you staying on the right track. School choice, the ability to not be assigned to a school, but to find a school, find a school that works for whatever it is you're attempting to work with. We can call this one chance, blessing. Maybe it could be a blessing, or it could be chance, it could be luck, but like your trip going to Denmark happened by chance, very much the way that you described it. You were in the right place at the right moment. Yes. When that dropped in your lap, but it made a world of difference. So we can call that blessing, chance, luck. High expectations. So the expectation was, if I can get A's, you can get A's too. I think that's a huge one. I also heard something about independence. The self-control that you learned in Denmark helped you to be a better student your first year in college and avoid some of the pitfalls. But that happened because you had been independent. You had been given some room to have to fix things yourselves. And then the last one I heard was role models, like Claire Huxtable. She did something totally different for you than she did for me. So what do you think about that list? It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things. Would you adjust it? Anything else you would add or change?
The only thing I would add to that list is the positive affirmation that nobody is better than you. There's God or whomever you believe in, and then there's everybody else.
And that to me is the perfect landing spot for me, because the show is about closing the belief gap. And that is the most powerful kind of statement you just said, at closing the belief gap, that if you are not God, I'm not fearing that you're better than me, as a belief closer. So that stops stereotype, threat, imposter syndrome, your self-sabotage, like at times where you might self-sabotage. Well, I can't do anything because I'm not like them. So anyways, well, listen, I appreciate you so much for coming on today and for sharing this. Can you let people know how they can be in touch and how they can help maybe with Jane?
Absolutely. And thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. People can reach me at info@jane-inc.org.
All right. Say it one more time.
Info, INFO, at Jane, JANE, hyphen, Inc., INC.org, ORG.
Amazing. Well, I want to thank you, and I want to thank our watchers and our listeners and our viewers who have been participating in the comments. Thank you all for giving us a portion of your time today. I want to keep doing the driving home the same point over and over again. Study success, and today's lesson in studying success is also that success, also a part of it, is coming back and helping to open doors for others to be successful too. So there would be a way for Samantha Wilson Jones to be like happy with herself about her own success and just live her life and never give back. But that's actually not the lesson here. The lesson here is actually each one teach one, each one reach one. We are accountable for something higher than ourselves. We are building something higher than ourselves. And our own success is actually not our own success. It's actually a collective success. Success runs in our race, and we should actually realize that we didn't get anywhere on our own. None of us got anywhere on our own. There were always supporting actors that God put in our way to actually become what God wants us to become. So we should appreciate that every day. We should act like that. And young people don't have enough champions. They don't have enough people saying, I am invested in your success, and come hell or high water, I'm going to feed every opportunity I can to you, and I want you to succeed. They need to see more of that. So thank you all for those of you who are doing that already. And Samantha, thank you so much again. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a pleasure.